Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Triple F Podcast, Faith, Family, and Freedom. And on this episode, wait a second. On this episode, what are we going to talk about, Jim Hochberg?
Well, hey, Eva, we're going to talk about why the government thinks it can get away with making us wear masks, making us get vaccinations or tests to go to restaurants. Why is it they think they can do that, and what's our key to get out of it?
Sounds good. So let's chat about that. Jim, I know that you're just like I am, and you're probably still getting inundated with emails and phone calls from people in the community saying, when is this lockdown ever going to end?
All the time. And I just came back from the mainland, and when other people come back from the mainland, they have previously expressed what I experienced. You have so much freedom until you get off the plane here and you're back to masking, testing, all that stuff.
I know.
It's wrong and it's unnecessary.
It's hilarious because even I went to the
It's
mainland
sad.
and I get to the mainland and suddenly I realize that I can walk through a shopping mall maskless.
Freedom.
And I'm like, I never realized how much you can actually breathe without a mask on. But I have to say there are some times where wearing a mask is actually kind of pleasant, but I'm sure you
Like
don't
in the
want to talk
bathroom?
about that. Yeah, there might be some instances where you might be glad that you're wearing a mask. But so let's talk about the emergency powers, because that keeps, it's one of those conversations that you can talk about it a million times, but it keeps coming back. You know, it's kind of like, acid reflux. You can take a couple of pills, but the next thing you know, you're experiencing the pain again. So let's talk about that. And I know that this is a big passion for you. So
That's true. And we're going to start with our constant refrain. You have to vote for people that are going to share your values and protect your rights. That's who you have to vote for. We haven't been doing that. And so what we have is people with political power in office trampling on our rights, and it's our own fault. So we got to fix that.
what we have is we have a lot of people who may not even be registered to vote. So our first call to action is to make sure, I don't care what state you are, if you're watching this right now, you got to make sure that if you're 18 or older, that you're registered to vote. And then you have to make sure that you actually take time to vote when elections roll around. It's super important.
And you have to vote with a reasonable understanding. Don't fail to do your homework and then vote. Do your homework and then vote.
I remember once a pastor was talking about how when some people read scripture, they don't have a plan. They just kind of go into deep prayer and meditation, and then they just open the Bible and then they press down on the book, and then whatever comes up is what they talk about. And I remember that this particular pastor said, what do you do when you open up the Bible and you press that passage and it says, and Haman went out and hung himself, and I that's kind of how we treat voting. We get there to there are some of you out there that are watching this are going, hey, wait a second, you're not talking to me. And I don't want to put everybody into this box, because we have a lot of people that watch that are very mindful of what they're doing when they're at that ballot box. But for those of you that think that it's as easy as picking the first name on the list, whoever that is, or maybe the other thing too is when people just keep voting for the same person. And here in Hawaii, that happens a
all
lot,
the
right?
time.
Where there's a loyalty factor that, the person's been sitting in office
Or
forever.
there's a desire not to shame that person by kicking them out. If you think about it, usually the way incumbent politicians lose their positions here is they run for a higher office and lose. That's
Right.
usually the thing.
So all states have constitutions. So we have the U.S. Constitution, and then each state has their own constitution. And you're going to be talking about the state of Hawaii's constitution.
So if you're wondering, how is it that the governor of the state of Hawaii, since March 3rd, 2020, has been completely running the country, except for a few little things the legislature's done here and there. And of course, the judiciary's been doing their thing the whole time. But the judiciary's not supposed to be making new rules. That's actually the legislature's job. The executive branch, which is the governor, is supposed to implement the new things that the legislature creates as laws. But that hasn't been happening for a year and a half plus. And when the governor exercises legislative power to create new laws, which we've been living under, with no voting by anybody, no representation in his office of me or you or anybody else, he's just making these decisions, all powerful David Ige, the system doesn't work the way a democracy, a republic is supposed to be representing us when they make the laws.
Well, you're making the comment that he's making all of these decisions without power, but the legislature had the opportunity to fix this.
Well, that's what I'm going to tell you. That's what I'm going to share, because the statute that gives the governor this emergency power during an emergency is Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 127A. And it was created in 2014. It's relatively new. Before 2014, we had another emergency statute that was more from the Cold War. It was about, under the desk and, praying or whatever. And that's kind of facetious because the governor did have certain powers, but they really didn't apply to current life. So the legislature made this new law. And the thing about the law is, as if you watch this show or if you're aware of the legislative process, a bill gets introduced, it goes to committees, they have hearings, they amend it. And then it gets voted on finally in the final form. And if it passes, it can become law. So this particular bill went in with the language of the length of time for the governor's power with no limit. It just said as long as the governor thinks he needs to be in control, he's in control.
And let's be clear that probably at the time they did this, they probably didn't anticipate that it would last as long as it did.
They did.
However,
No.
you think they did?
I know they
that
did.
This was a plan.
No. They knew it was going to be potentially abused. So in the very first committee hearing, the very first amendment was to limit the governor's power to 60 days from the day he announces by proclaiming the emergency. And it's actually stricter than most other states. What our law says, which is 127A-14, subparagraph D as in dog, on the 60th day after the proclamation of the emergency powers automatically terminate.
Okay, automatically terminate, to be clear, means
Automatically terminate.
Pow. Done.
Most other states said things like, unless two concurrent resolutions of the legislature both say the same thing, then that's what happens next. Hawaii had nothing. It could end earlier than the 60 days in Hawaii if the legislature took back their power early. So what happened in Hawaii is on March 3rd, 2020, the governor announced that we had a COVID emergency. And in that first proclamation, he says on March 3rd, even though Hawaii does not have one case of COVID, because the World Health Organization is telling us everybody's going to get it and everybody's going to die, I'm going to take over. I'm going to proclaim an emergency. And the interesting thing is I actually sued in July of 2020 because the 60 days had ended on May 5th. And I had clients in Kona that were cited at the beginning of July for not staying quarantined, although they actually were because they were not in public. They were in the common area of their condo. And I sued because the order that the governor had issued after May 3rd that they were cited under was unlawful because it was past the 60 days. And we had this whole state court proceeding where I argued about separation of powers. The legislature only gave the governor their legislative lawmaking power for 60 days, and automatically it went back to them and it wasn't his. And the judge agreed that that's what the law said, even looking at the First Amendment to the bill, where it went from unlimited power for the governor to 60 days. The legislature made that change because they wanted it that way, and that's the way it passed, and it still says that. But what the judge said to me is, I can't rule that the governor is acting unlawfully because we're still in a pandemic. And that would be absurd. So I can't do it. And I argued to her, actually, you can. You can rule that the governor's been acting unlawfully since May 5th and that you're going to wait to wipe out everything he's done for 3 weeks so the legislature can come do their thing and make a law. But she didn't think that would work, so she just ruled out of her own mind that the 60-day limit could be another 60 days and could be another 60 days as long as the governor did a new proclamation before the first 60 days or the second 60 days ran out. So he could string 60-day proclamations together forever.
And now, fast forwarding to where we are in this current world, we have just had lockdown after lockdown, relaxing of some of the rules, adding some of the rules. I mean, this has been our life here in the state of Hawaii.
So because I flew back from Dulles and it's a 10-hour nonstop flight, I had a lot of time on Saturday to think about this, figure out what is it that the people need to do to take back their government, and what is it that we can do to accomplish that.
Are you assuming that people want to take back their government?
Well, all of the complaining that I'm getting from people, they do. I'm not hearing from people that don't, but I am hearing from a lot of people that do. So let's think about how we can do this.
Well, we hope that you listeners and viewers are one of those people that are saying, what can we do?
And you're going to share this, hopefully, with all of your other friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors that feel the same way. So it's got to be, we have to have a better way to limit the governor's powers to 60 days on an emergency than just being in that emergency statute, Chapter 127A. Because what the judge did was she said, I can see that the people are losing their constitutional legislative election powers because the governor's keeping it. But in the context of this emergency powers law, it makes sense to let him keep doing it.
Okay, so and what's really good about what you're going to get into, and I'm looking forward to this, is to really place people that are watching this into two categories. There are those that are so fed up right now that they are the ones that are showing up in different places. They've got signs, they're picketing, and that is one way to show your angst. That is one way.
And somebody may pay attention to it and change their mind, who has the power to do it.
Right. So that's one way you can do it. The other way you can do it is look long-term in the sense, long-term, short-term in the sense of what is going to have the ultimate end that we want. And that is to take back our government.
what we're talking about is how can the people in Hawaii, as a grassroots effort, individuals by themselves with their family and friends in small groups, in big groups, not only at the voting booth, but in advance of the time you're going to be voting next year, what can you do? And I want to put this in the context of what has been done to you that you don't even realize. So when the governor exceeded the 61st day, which was May 6th, 2020. It's been more than a year he's been acting unlawfully according to the statute, not according to the judge, but the judge did not and cannot change the language of the statute. The statute still says automatically terminates on the 60th day.
Although we'll just take a quick segue to say that the Hawaii State Legislature is going to be taking this up in the 2022 legislative session.
But the problem with what they're going to do is they're doing it in that same emergency power statute. So the judge is going to be looking at the 60 days against the emergency, which I think is a bad context because it was so easy for the governor to weigh the emergency over your rights and pick the emergency and shoot your rights to death. And so looking at the state constitution, let's get down to it. So our state constitution, I bet you didn't know this. I know you do because we've talked about it, but I bet you didn't know this. The very first paragraph of the state of Hawaii Constitution after the preamble is Article 1, Section 1. And this is what it actually says. And this is what you need to know because you need to start exercising this. All political power of this state, all of it, is inherent in the people. That means the governor has no political power if you exercise your political power.
Well, their political power is given by the people.
Has no political power unless you let them exercise political power as your representative. This is what we need to do. We need to make sure they actually do represent us. They represent you. So it says, all political power of this state is inherent in the people, and the responsibility for the exercise of that power rests with the people. And there's going to be access to that section so that you can look at it yourself. All government is founded on this authority. Okay? That means there is no government in the state of Hawaii that is existing other than the political power of the people responsibly used. So, the second section of the state constitution, right after that, says all persons are free by nature and are equal in their inherent and inalienable rights. Among these rights are the enjoyment of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the acquiring and possessing of property. And it says these rights cannot endure. They can't continue. They can't live. Or on the flip side, they will die and be taken away unless the people recognize their corresponding obligations and responsibilities. Okay? So what we're saying is you have to exercise your political power. The government in the state of Hawaii only has political power as long as you let them exercise it. And the analogy I like to use is people appear to me, generally speaking, to view the government exercising those people's political power as though it was the garage next door and the car owned by the neighbor next door sitting in that garage. It's like it's not your car, it's your neighbor's car. You don't put gas in it, you don't wash it, you don't drive it, you don't really care. You see it, it's great. That's not the way it is. All political power is inherent in you. So what do we do? Okay, so this election in 2022 is unique because we just had a 10-year turn of the calendar, which means we had the census. And now this is the first election after the census.
And there's some redistricting that's happened.
There's redistricting. But in Hawaii, when there is the census and the redistricting, everybody's going to have to run for office. Everybody doesn't run for office every election. Some people do, and some people skip election cycles because their office term is longer.
Especially in the Senate.
This time, everybody in state government, the governors, the mayors, the council member, the legislature, the House members, everybody except the federal guys in Congress and the U.S. Senate, they're all running for office. So what do we want to do? We want to give them knowledge that we want a change in the Constitution to protect us from the governor's powers, because the legislature making it really, really clear that that 60 days is it in the same statute it's already in is too easy for the judge to say, no, it's the emergency power outweighs the liberty rights of people because it's in the same statute. What the judge does is looks at the whole statute that the question is inherent in and makes the decision weighing those things. So I want us to say we want to add to the Constitution of the state of Hawaii that section 1 of the political power, which says all political power of the state is inherent in the people, and the responsibility for the exercise thereof rests with the people. I want us to add this. When emergency powers are invoked by the governor and or any mayor, all emergency power related thereto shall expire automatically after 60 days. And then you have to put a little bit of help for how the people are supposed to deal with it. So it goes on after 60 days, regardless of the severity of the emergency, unless the legislature extends the emergency and in the interim no new disaster or emergency may be declared or proclaimed based on the events that supported the original, unless the legislature passes an authorizing concurrent resolution. So how would we tell the guys we want this? There's going to be a legislative session in January of 2022, which will run through April or May of 2022. We need, as a grassroots, to call our House members and our senators in the Hawaii legislature. And you'll have these 3 pieces of paper handy for you to use as reference from watching this show.
And what we want you to do is we want you to sign up to become a member at Hawaii Family Advocates, because any of these bills that move I will be ensuring that Jim knows about it so that he can give you specific talking points on how to get involved, because the bill he's talking about has not been written yet.
It's not even written.
It's not even written.
But-
And there may be others that may be bad. So we
and the
want
thing
to
is,
stay
too, though,
on top of this.
But the way the process needs to happen is each of you calls your House member and your senator and says, I would like you to put in a bill, because that's the way it has to work, to let us amend our state constitution, Article 1, Section 1, to add that the emergency powers end at 60 days. And you'll have this language. You can say, here's the language I want you to use. And if all these legislators are asked to do this and they put in a bill and it doesn't pass, or they don't put in a bill, every single one of them is an incumbent running for office in the fall of next year. And I want to be able to have them explain why they did not give this to us. And if their explanation is, well, we passed a bill to put it in the emergency power statute, we can tell them that wasn't good enough, and now we can vote for other people.
We're going to put this exact language on the Hawaii Family Advocate site, and it'll be in the description below. So make sure you click on that so you can see the actual suggested
And
language.
I believe the website is hawaiifamilyadvocates.com.
Correct. So make sure you check that out. And Hawaii Family Advocates is a C4 organization. So by getting involved with Hawaii Family Advocates, you're also going to be able to get some information potentially on candidates running for office. You're not going to get any of that information from Hawaii Family Forum because we're a 501c3.
But you will do a questionnaire, right?
We're planning. I mean, that's
so
we do one
some
every
from
year.
you, but they can
will
get some from us too.
So you want to make sure you become a member over there.
So this is a multi-step plan. That's in the closing. You've got to understand. Between Christmas and the middle of January 2022, Christmas 2021, middle of January 2022, we need you to get these pieces of paper that you get through Eva's magic, and you call your legislator, tell them you want this change of the Constitution. When it's happening at the legislature, Eva will let you know, because it's going to be a bill that she's going to have in Hawaii Family Forum's magic that she does. If it doesn't pass, we use it at the election to elect people so that in the next legislative session, people that want to do this hopefully will sit in those chairs, and they will then pass it and let us vote on it. Because what we do know for a fact is we cannot trust the governor or the legislature to protect our constitutional political power, because they enjoy exercising it themselves.
So in these last final seconds, what we want to do is encourage you as you're sitting there. You might be feeling like you're called to run for office. And if you feel like that's something that you might want to do, reach out to hawaiifamilyadvocates.com. Send an email to Jim. We'll put his email there on the bottom of the screen. Once you become a candidate and you're official, then Jim can no longer work with you. But prior to that, there are some criteria that we look for.
You don't become a candidate until you file papers, which will be in the
probably
late
May,
spring
June
next year.
Yes, but stay plugged in. Make sure you're registered to vote. And then when the election season rolls around, make sure you show up at the polls and do all things at all times on the foundational scriptures given to us by the Lord Jesus Christ in the Bible that we stand on as the full truth. We will see you next week. Thanks for joining us today.
Amen.